The studio lights felt warmer than usual, as if the air itself carried the weight of anticipation. Sundar Pichai sat across from the host, a calm smile on his face, though his mind was running through the dozens of questions he expected. It was a live interview, and millions were watching. The reporter across from him was known for pushing boundaries, for asking the one question that could shake even the most composed guest. For the first 15 minutes, it was the usual dance. Questions about Google's new projects, the future of AI, the balance between innovation and privacy. Sundar answered each one with thoughtfulness, his words steady, his tone humble. But then, without warning, the reporter leaned forward, her voice lowering just enough to create tension. "Sundar," she said, pausing for effect, "you've achieved more than most people could dream of. But tell me, what is your biggest regret?" The room went silent. Even the background noise from the production crew seemed to fade. Sundar froze for a moment, not because he didn't have an answer, but because the truth he carried was one he had avoided sharing for years. He could have easily given a safe reply, something about not spending enough time with family or wishing he had started a project sooner. But, deep inside, he knew this was the moment to speak from the heart. His eyes softened, and for the first time during the interview, his voice wavered. "My biggest regret," he began slowly, "is connected to someone I loved. Someone I never had the chance to help when they needed me the most." The reporter's eyebrows rose, sensing the depth behind his words. "Who?" she asked. Gently, Sundar leaned back, memories flooding his mind. He saw a dusty street in Chennai, the old bus stop, and a young boy sitting alone with a notebook, too worn to hold together. The boy's name was Arun, and he was more than just a classmate. He was a friend who dreamed bigger than anyone else Sundar had known. But those dreams were crushed long before they could take shape. "Years ago," Sundar continued, "when I was in school, Arun was one of the smartest people I knew. Smarter than me? Even, he wanted to be an engineer. He used to stay up late drawing designs for machines he wanted to build. But his family struggled. They didn't have enough for school fees or books. I didn't do enough to help him. And one day, he just disappeared from school. I never saw him again." The audience was hooked. You could feel it in the air. The story was pulling everyone in. "What happened to him?" the reporter asked, leaning forward. Sundar looked down at his hands. "That's what I don't know. For years I've wondered. Sometimes I tell myself there was nothing I could have done. But deep inside, I know that's not true. Maybe if I had spoken up, maybe if I had convinced others to help, his life could have been different." That thought stays with me every single day. There was a pause, and then the reporter asked the question that would change the tone of the entire conversation. "So, if you could go back, what would you do differently?" Sundar's voice grew firm, though it carried a quiet sadness. "I would find him. I would make sure he never gave up on his dream, and I would do whatever it took to help him succeed." But before the reporter could move on, Sundar glanced at the camera and added something that made everyone in the studio hold their breath. "And now," he said, "I think I have a way to find him, because just last week, I received a letter." His words hung in the air like the final note of a song that no one wanted to end. Asterisk, the reporter's pen froze above. Her notebook, her eyes narrowing with curiosity. "A letter?" she asked, her voice careful, as if she didn't want to break the spell of the moment. The studio lights seemed dimmer now, though Sundar knew they were just as bright as before. It was the weight of what he was about to share. That made everything else fade. He nodded slowly, his fingers curling slightly on the armrest of the chair. "Yes," he said, almost in a whisper. "It arrived at my office. Unsigned, but with handwriting I could never forget. Handwriting that once filled the margins of my own school books with diagrams, notes, and equations. It was Arun's." The audience gasped, not the loud, exaggerated gasp of a stage show, but the quiet intake of breath that comes when people realize something extraordinary is unfolding before them. What did it say? The reporter asked, her voice no longer carrying the sharp edge of an interviewer. She had become something else now, someone leaning in, desperate to hear the next line of a story that might just change the way she looked at the world. Sundar's eyes dropped to the floor, as though the words of the letter were printed there. It said, "I don't know if you'll remember me. I don't know if this letter will even reach you. But I've been watching your journey from afar. I'm proud of you, Sundar. And I need your help." His voice faltered for just a moment, and the silence in the room deepened. He could feel the gaze of every person in the studio, each of them trying to imagine the life behind those few words. He continued. There was no address, no phone number, just a location scribbled at the bottom, a place I've never been to. Before, it was a small town in the north, far from where we grew up. The reporter tilted her head. "So, you're going to find him?" Sundar let out a slow breath. I don't know how I could not. It's been more than 3 decades, but the moment I saw that handwriting, it was like no time had passed. I saw his face again. I remembered the sound of his laughter when we would race down the school corridor. And I remembered the look in his eyes the last time I saw him, when he knew he would never be coming back. He paused, and for a moment, he wasn't the CEO of one of the biggest companies in the world. He wasn't the man millions looked to for leadership. He was just a boy again, feeling powerless as a friend slipped through his fingers. I didn't answer the letter right away, he admitted. Not because I didn't want to, but because I was afraid. Afraid that I'd find someone broken beyond repair. Afraid that I'd be too late. The reporter leaned closer, her eyes searching his face. "And what changed your mind?" He smiled faintly, but it wasn't the smile of someone recalling a happy memory. It was the smile of someone who had decided to face the hardest truth. "My son," he said softly. "He saw the letter on my desk. He asked me about it, and when I told him, he looked at me and said, 'Papa, if you can help someone, you should. Even if you're scared.' And just like that, I knew I had to go." The audience seemed to hold its collective breath. The reporter didn't speak. No one moved. Sundar straightened in his chair, his voice steady now. "I'm leaving tomorrow." He said, "No cameras, no team, just me. I need to find out what happened to Arun and why, after all these years, he's reached out." And then he added something that made the entire studio lean forward as one. "But there's one more thing in that letter. Something that keeps me awake at night." The reporter blinked. "What?" Sundar's eyes darkened, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "At the very bottom, after the location, there was a single line. It said, 'Don't tell anyone. Else, it's not safe.'" The silence that followed wasn't just heavy, it was electric. And somewhere, deep in the audience, someone's phone buzzed, but no one dared to look away. Asterisk, the next morning came too quickly. Sundar barely slept, his mind replaying the words from Arun's letter over and over, especially that last chilling line, "Don't tell anyone else. It's not safe." It wasn't the kind of thing you wrote unless you were truly in danger, and Sundar knew enough about the world to understand that danger could take many forms. Still, he felt a pull inside him, stronger than fear, stronger than doubt. He left. His home before sunrise. The city was still waking up, the streets holding on to the quiet before the chaos of the day. He carried only a small bag, no corporate entourage, no assistants, no bodyguards. It had been years since he traveled this way, alone and unannounced, and there was something strangely grounding about it. The first part of the journey was by plane, but his mind wasn't on the seatbelt signs or the in-flight announcements. Instead, it was on the memory of Arun sitting under the neem tree outside their school, sketching a machine in the dust with a stick because he didn't have a notebook that day. Sundar remembered crouching beside him, watching the crude shapes come to life under his friend's hand, and hearing him whisper about how one day he'd build something that would make life easier for everyone when the plane landed. Sundar found himself in a small regional airport. The air smelled faintly of smoke and damp earth, and the sounds were different here. More human voices, less traffic. He hired an old taxi to take him toward the town scribbled in the letter. The driver was a wiry man with deep lines in his face, the kind that told stories of decades spent under the sun. Not many people go there. The driver said after hearing the destination, "Quiet place, but lately, strange things. Sundar glanced at him. What kind of strange things? Asterisk, the driver hesitated, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. People come and people go. Sometimes they don't come back. The words were vague, but they were enough to make Sundar's chest tighten. The road narrowed as they drove, the landscape shifting from busy markets to scattered houses, then to open fields where children chased each other barefoot every few miles. They passed faded billboards with peeling paint, some advertising things that probably no longer existed. Asterisk. After hours of travel, the driver stopped near a small tea stall at the edge of town. "This is where I turn back," he said, pointing to a dirt path. "You follow that road, you'll find the place, but be careful." Sundar thanked him, shouldered his bag and started walking. The path was uneven, with tufts of grass breaking through cracks in the ground. The town slowly revealed itself small brick houses, many with broken shutters, and narrow lanes where the sound of his footsteps seemed too loud that he found a modest guest house run by an elderly woman with kind eyes. She gave him a room on the second floor, overlooking the main street. "You're not from here," she said, not as a question, but as a fact. "Just visiting," he replied. She nodded, but he caught the way her gaze lingered, as if she was trying to place him. After a simple meal, Sundar sat by the window, watching the street below. He saw a boy carrying a stack of books that seemed too heavy for his small frame, and something about it struck him like a ghost from the past later that night, when the guest house had gone quiet. He took the letter out of his bag and read it again by the dim yellow light. There was no mistaking the handwriting, but what unsettled him wasn't just the words, it was the fact that the ink had smudged in a few places, as though written in haste, or with hands that trembled. The next morning, Sundar began asking discreet questions in the market. Most people either didn't know Arun or claimed they didn't, but one old shopkeeper, after hearing the name, went still for a moment before shaking his head quickly. "No, I don't know," he said, but his eyes told a different story. Just as Sundar was about to leave, a young girl tugged at his sleeve. She couldn't have been more than 10, her hair tied in 2 loose braids. She looked around nervously before whispering, "If you're looking for Arun, you should go to the factory on the edge of town. But don't tell anyone I told you." Before he could ask another question, she slipped into the crowd and vanished. The factory. The word didn't sit right with him. What would Arun be doing in a place like that? He decided to go, but as he approached the dusty road leading there, he noticed something: 2 men leaning against the wall, watching him. When he turned the corner, they began to follow, and that's when Sundar realized Arun's warning in the letter hadn't been exaggeration. Asterisk, the 2 men kept their distance at first, but Sundar could feel their presence like a shadow pressing against his back. Every few steps, he glanced at the stalls and narrow lanes ahead, searching for a way to disappear into the crowd. But the market was thin now, replaced by quieter streets where the sound of his shoes on the dusty ground seemed to echo. He turned left, hoping to lose them, but the road ended abruptly at a rusted gate. It was chained shut, weeds curling up through the bars. He could hear faint footsteps behind him, steady, deliberate. Sundar didn't want to run, not yet, but he picked up his pace and turned again, heading toward the direction the girl had pointed earlier. The factory appeared like a ghost out of the haze. Its walls were weathered and stained, with broken windows that looked like watchful eyes. The tall smokestack was silent, and the air around it felt heavier, as if it held secrets. No one dared speak aloud. Sundar slowed, scanning the perimeter. It looked abandoned, but he had lived long enough to know that appearances could be carefully constructed lies. Just as he stepped closer, he caught sight of a flicker of movement inside. Someone was there. He ducked behind a rusted sheet of metal leaning against the wall and waited. The 2 men following him had arrived now, lingering near the entrance. They spoke in low voices he couldn't quite make out. One of them pulled out a phone, glanced at the screen, and then looked straight toward the spot where Sundar was hiding. His heartbeat thudded against his ribs. He told himself to stay calm. Running would only confirm he had something to hide. Instead, he stood, dusted off his hands, and walked straight toward them, looking for something. One of the men asked, his tone too casual to be casual. Yes, Sundar replied evenly. I'm trying to find an old friend. Maybe you know him, Arun. The men exchanged a quick glance, just a flicker, but enough to tell him they did know something. Never heard of him, the taller one said, though his voice had a slight tremor. Sundar held their gaze for a moment longer before turning toward the factory gates. Thank you anyway, he said, as if he believed them. But he didn't. Every instinct told him he was getting close. He walked through a side path, along the wall until he found a gap where the bricks had crumbled. Slipping through, he entered a narrow courtyard filled with old crates and twisted metal. The smell of oil still clung to the air, though the machinery inside hadn't run for years. Then, from somewhere deep inside, he heard it, a faint metallic sound, like chains shifting. It was followed by a cough, raspy and weak. Sundar froze. Arun. He called softly. Silence. He stepped deeper into the building, the wooden floor creaking beneath his weight. Shafts of sunlight cut through the cracks catching on particles of dust that floated like tiny ghosts. He followed the sound until he reached a half-open door. Pushing it gently, he found a dimly lit room. There was a man inside, sitting on the floor, his back against the wall. His clothes were worn, his face thin, but his eyes. Those eyes were the same ones Sundar remembered from childhood, bright, restless, full of thought. Arun, Sundar breathed. The man looked up, and for a moment there was no recognition, only suspicion. Then his expression shifted, disbelief, softening into something else, relief, maybe, or exhaustion. You came? He whispered. Sundar stepped forward, but Arun lifted a hand. No, they'll see you. Who? Arun glanced toward the narrow window, his voice trembling. The ones watching this place. The ones who don't want me to leave. Before Sundar could respond, footsteps echoed in the corridor. Outside, heavy, deliberate, Arun's voice turned urgent. You have to go. Now, they can't know we've spoken. I'm not leaving you here, Sundar said, firmly. Arun single quotes S eyes were pleading now. If you stay, they'll take you too. The door handle began to turn. The metal handle turned slowly, as if whoever was outside wanted the sound to be heard. Sundar's pulse quickened. Arun's eyes darted toward a shadowy corner behind an old cabinet. Hi there, he whispered. His voice sharp but low. Sundar hesitated. He didn't want to cower while his friend sat chained in a room, but the urgency in Arun's tone left no room for argument. He slipped into the narrow gap, the rough wooden back of the cabinet pressing against his shoulder blades. From there, he could see just enough through the sliver of space between the cabinet and the wall. The door creaked open. Two men stepped. Inside, neither of them were the ones who had followed Sundar earlier, but they carried the same quiet menace. Their boots were thick with dust, their shirts stained with oil. One of them had a deep scar across his jawline, a jagged reminder of some fight he had clearly survived. Morning, genius, the scarred man said, his voice dripping with mockery. Ready to start work? Arun didn't answer. He simply stared at the floor. The other man stepped forward, crouching to meet Arun's eyes. We told you before, no messages, no visitors. You stay quiet, you stay alive. Break the rule and... He let the sentence trail off, his gaze shifting to the heavy iron pipe leaning against the wall. Sundar's hands clenched into fists. It took every ounce of restraint not to step out and confront them right there. But Arun gave the slightest shake of his head, almost imperceptible, as if to say, not now. After a tense silence, the two men yanked Arun to his feet. His legs wobbled, and Sundar noticed for the first time the chain around his ankle, thin but strong, attached to a bolt in the floor. The men unhooked it and began leading him out. Let's go. The scarred man barked when their footsteps faded. Sundar emerged from the hiding spot, his mind spinning. He moved quickly to the window, watching as they escorted Arun across the courtyard toward another section of the factory. There were more men stationed there, guards by the look of it, and some kind of machinery running. Though it was covered under tarps, he needed a plan. Charging in without one would only get both of them caught, or worse. But first, he had to find out why Arun was here at all. That afternoon, Sundar began quietly talking to locals again. But this time he chose his words carefully, asking about the factory, instead of mentioning Arun by name. Most people avoided answering. One shop owner muttered, "It's better to keep your head down if you want to keep it," before quickly changing the subject. Later, as Sundar walked along the outskirts of town, an old man selling roasted corn beckoned him over. His eyes were sharp, and his voice carried the weight of someone who had seen more than he should have. "You're not from here?" the old man said, handing Sundar a cob of corn he hadn't asked for. "But you're asking questions no outsider should." Sundar didn't deny it. "I'm looking for someone. I think he's being kept in that factory." The old man's face hardened. "You think right, but you don't know the half of it. That place isn't a factory. It's a workshop for things no one should be building. And the man you're looking for, he's the only one who knows how to make them work." "They're not letting him go. What are they making?" Sundar asked, his voice low. The man's eyes darted toward the dirt road, scanning for anyone listening. "Machines that can tear through steel like paper. Tools meant for destruction, not building. Your friend, he's a genius. They've trapped him here to design them." A cold weight settled in Sundar's chest. Arun had always wanted to create things that help people, not hurt them. The thought of him being forced to do the opposite made Sundar's stomach turn. "If I can get him out," Sundar said. "Will you help me hide him?" The old man studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Yes, but you'll only have one chance. Once they know you're here for him, the whole town will turn into a trap." That night, Sundar returned to the guest house and sat in the dark, staring out at the quiet street. The weight of the decision pressed down on him. He knew going in again could mean not coming back. But leaving wasn't an option, not when Arun's life, and maybe much more, was on the line. As the clock neared midnight, he pulled out the letter one more time. The smudged ink at the bottom almost looked like it had been dragged by a trembling hand. He thought about the boy he had once known, sitting under a neem tree, dreaming of building something beautiful. Tomorrow, Sundar decided, he would make his move. But just as he was about to turn off the light, there was a soft knock at his door. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps. When he opened it, a folded piece of paper slid in from under the door. It was from Arun, and it said only 5 words. "They know you are here." Sundar stared at the 5 words on the paper, his pulse pounding so hard. He could feel it in his throat. "They know you are here." He shut the door silently, every muscle in his body tightening. He didn't know how the message had reached him, whether Arun had slipped it through someone trustworthy or whether it had been thrown into the hallway in a moment of desperation. But he knew one thing. The clock had started ticking. He moved, quickly but quietly, gathering the few things he had brought. The air outside was still, but there was a heaviness in it. A kind of quiet that didn't belong in a place where people lived. Through the window, he could see the street emptying. Faster than it should for that hour. Shop shutters were closing early, lights flicking off one by one. As though the whole town had silently agreed to disappear before something began, the guest house hallway felt longer than before, every step echoing faintly against the worn wood. Sundar descended the stairs, ready to slip out unnoticed, but at the bottom stood the old woman who ran the place. She was holding a lantern, her face partially in shadow. "You should leave now," she whispered, without asking why. He gave a small nod, and her eyes softened for a fraction of a second before she stepped aside. Outside, the night air was cooler. Sundar kept to the side streets, avoiding the main road, his mind running through every detail of the factory layout he had memorized earlier. He knew where the guards had been, where the tarps covered the machinery, and where the narrow side entrance stood. The plan was simple: get in, find Arun, and get out before they realized both men were gone. But plans, he knew, rarely survived the first moment of contact with reality. As he neared the factory's shadow, the quiet broke. Voices carried in the distance, low, urgent, moving toward him. He ducked behind a wall, his back pressed against the cold brick, and waited until the sound passed. Then he moved quickly, finding the side entrance exactly where he remembered it. The lock was old, the metal corroded. It took only a firm twist and a shove to break it open. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of rust and oil. Every creak of the floor made him wince. He followed the faint memory of the path he had taken earlier, slipping past the darkened rooms until he reached the one where he had first seen Arun. It was empty now. Panic tightened his chest, but he forced himself to think. They had moved Arun earlier in the day toward the section where the machines were kept. Sundar pressed forward, the corridors narrowing until he reached a heavy sliding door. Muffled voices came from the other side. He eased it open just enough to see. Arun was there, sitting at a workbench under a single hanging bulb. His hands were busy assembling something small and intricate, his face pale under the harsh light. Two guards stood nearby, their attention fixed on the object in his hands. Sundar knew this was the moment. He scanned the room, spotting a stack of old metal rods leaning in the corner. He picked one up, its weight reassuring in his grip, and stepped inside without a sound. Thought it happened fast. One guard turned, eyes widening, but Sundar swung the rod, knocking him off balance. The other lunged forward, but Arun, moving with surprising speed, shoved the workbench into him, sending parts scattering across the floor. "Come on." Sundar hissed. Grabbing Arun's arm, they ran. The corridor seemed longer now, each one stretching into the next. Footsteps thundered behind them, more guards, shouting orders. Sundar pushed Arun through the side door and into the open air, but as they reached the edge of the courtyard, a figure stepped out from the shadows. It was the scarred man from before. His expression was calm, almost amused. "You think you can take him?" he asked, blocking their path. "You don't know what you're getting into. Pichai?" "I know enough," Sundar said, his voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline. The scarred man smirked. "Then you know we'll find you. And when we do, both of you will wish you had stayed here." There was no time for words. Sundar grabbed Arun and sprinted past him, shoving the man aside. They tore down the path, the lights of the factory growing smaller behind them, until the town's edges came into view. The old man from the corn stall was waiting, his small truck idling. "Get in," he shouted. They climbed into the back, and the truck lurched forward, bouncing over the uneven road. Behind them, shouts grew fainter, swallowed by the night. Only when the truck had crossed the last stretch of open land did Sundar finally let himself breathe. Arun sat beside him, silent, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "You saved me," Arun said finally, his voice rough. "But they won't stop." Sundar turned to him. "Then we won't either. This time, I'm not letting you disappear." The truck disappeared into the dark hills, carrying two men who had once been boys under a neem tree, boys who had dreamed of building something good in a world that often tried to destroy it. And for the first time in decades, Sundar felt the weight of his old regret lifting, replaced by a quiet, unshakable resolve. Asterisk.